All right, so now that it's 2 o'clock, just to make sure that we use everyone's times properly, I'll actually get started with the webinar itself. So I'll actually gonna start off with some quick introductions. So my name is Jeremy Andrews, and my role here at Vention is education and community lead. And essentially my role is to educate users such as yourself on how to use Vention's manufacturing automation platform, which includes the design software, which is MachineBuilder, which is the focus of today, as well as Machine Logic, which is the code-free programming language used to simulate the machines both in the CAD as well as in real life. So without further ado, I'd like to thank everyone that is attending today's webinar, Design Tips webinar on the smart design software for building custom automated machines in the cloud. With that, I'll jump over to the agenda just to see what we will be covering today. So today we do have 4 main things I would like to cover. First being just a basic design tips recap, showcasing a little bit what was covered in the previous webinar. From there, we'll be moving on to how to master the smart design tools that MachineBuilder does have to offer. And then in that, I'll be designing a parts presenter for a machine tending application. Third, we'll move on to designing something a bit more with some automation in it. So designing a simple automation piece of equipment. In this case, it will be a range extender. And finally, finishing off the webinar by showcasing how to combine and integrate multiple designs together, all within one system. So throughout the webinar, there are a few different ways that you can interact. First off is that you can ask questions in the Q&A section, as well as in the chat section as well, if you'd like to chat with other participants or myself. And finally, at the end, there will be an open mic portion where you can ask questions, both again to myself or other participants. One thing to note is the webinar is being recorded, so there will be a recording sent out afterwards, as well as posted on our website and the YouTube page if you'd like to reference it again. Final note, my colleague Caroline is on the call, so she will be monitoring both the Q&A and the chat section. So be sure to ask questions and they will be seen throughout the webinar. So without further ado, I can actually jump directly into some of the content. So the first thing, like I said, that I'm going to be covering is a quick recap on what was covered in the previous webinar. So in the previous webinar, what we worked towards essentially that you see on screen over here is a robot cell enclosure. So it includes both a smaller UR3 robot over here with a linear actuator, including the machine motion controller and e-stop. So what we did in the previous webinar is cover some of the basics of getting started in MachineBuilder. This included navigating the CAD itself. So for example, panning your design around, zooming in and out, maybe rotating using the cube or your mouse as well, recentering, doing a little bit of the UI discovery in terms of the tools that are available up top, and the parts library on the left. From there, we did go into some of the great smart design features that I will be elaborating a bit more on today, such as being able to connect parts using the snapping increments, as well as some panel generation. Again, the panel generation is one of the features that I'll be covering again today because it's something that's so powerful and very useful when designing your own custom machines or custom structures. And really for today's webinar, the goal at the end of the webinar is to create a dual CNC machine tending layout. So this is both a combination of some static structures, some automation equipment, and using MachineBuilder to essentially create a floor plan layout. So from here, again, if there's no questions about what was covered in the past, I'll move on to the first design that we will be working on for this webinar. So I'll close off the other one and bring this one on screen. So what we see on screen here is essentially a part presenter for a machine tending application. On the left, we have a completely finished design, and on the right is the skeleton frame of one that I have started recently earlier today. So the left is what we'll be working towards, and on the right, we'll be starting with, and I'll be showcasing and explaining step-by-step how you get from a partial design to something completely finished like this in as little as 5 to 10 minutes. Again, if there are any questions in terms of some of the things that I am kind of like jumping over because they are seen in the previous webinar, feel free to raise a hand or ask a question, and I'll see if I can address that as soon as possible. So getting right into it, the first thing that I want to do or figure out when I'm designing this station over here is to make sure that the dimensions are correct. So if I do kind of a side view over here, you'll notice the card on the right is a little bit slimmer in terms of the width than the one on the left. So the first thing I'll do is double check the measurements of the cart on the right. And I could do this by either going to the measurement tools up here or using some of the shortcuts. So that is one of the things that I'll be highlighting today are a lot of the shortcuts that you can use in MachineBuilder that do really speed up the design process. One of them is using the measurement tool E, which measures the edges of parts in your design. So again, I can go to the measurement tool and select that over here, or by clicking E on my keyboard, it automatically snaps the measurement tool to my cursor. So I notice over here, this increment over here, this measurement is 540 millimeters, and the one on the left is 630. That means I do need to make my cart a little bit wider, which is where we bring in one of the smart design tools that you can use when designing in MachineBuilder, which is the ability to completely resize a structure in as little as 2 clicks. So as opposed to other design softwares where normally you'd have to say, disconnect the entire structure, delete a few parts, bring in new parts, or even redesign them to fit with your structure, this can be done in a two-step process. The first is select all the members that make up that dimension. So in this case, I'm looking to resize the width. So I'll select these two extrusions over here. You can use a drag and drop window that, again, if you are accustomed to other CAD softwares, do function the same. So a drag and drop from the right to left selects everything that the window touches, and a drag from left to right selects everything that's completely inside the window. Obviously, the extrusions are not in the window, so I'll go back to the right to left. So once I've selected these two extrusions, I can then resize them to meet the internal dimensions that I'm looking for. Again, this could be done using the right click and selecting resize extrusions, or using another shortcut, which is the letter L on my keyboard to resize, to get the resize option available right away. With that, I'll drag it out to 630 millimeters, which is the width, internal width that I'm looking for, and then press enter to confirm. So that it's as easy as that to actually resize a complex structure like this. Again, you can do this if you have something a bit more complicated, say entire workstation, which was covered in a previous webinar if you'd like to check that out. So from here, the next thing that I'd really like to do is create this panel. So this is the next step in kind of getting the card on the right closer to the version on the left. So normally in order to create a panel, you hold Control and select all the members that the panel would be generating on top of, or if you're having a slotted panel, all the extrusion members that the panel will be slotted into. So in this case, I'm looking for these 4 members over here. So I'll hold Control and left click on each of them. Normally at this point, you would right click and then select Create Panel, but intentionally at this point, I did leave an error in design to showcase one of the best areas to troubleshoot your design. So bringing this back up, I'll select them all again, right click, and the Create Panel option is grayed out, and I will get a warning message here saying that not all extrusions are connected to each other. Connect and try again. So this is one of the common pitfalls that users fall into when generating their own panels. The way to get around this is to see where your connections are going wrong or to see what parts are not connected together. This can be done by either by right-clicking on a part and selecting highlight connected parts. What this does is it highlights all the parts that the one that you've selected is connected to. In this case, I'll see that this extrusion over here is connected to the horizontal one over here, as well as the vertical and the gusset and plate on the left side. But if I go over to the right, I'll notice that it is not connected to either the vertical or the horizontal extrusion. So this does need to be fixed for me to actually generate the panel. There's 2 ways to do this. The first being to select the 2 members that I'd like to connect, right-clicking, and then selecting attach selected parts. Or by using one of the other smart features is the ability to check connections. So by clicking this, what it does is it scans through my entire design and checks any parts that are not connected but should be and connects them together in the design space. So notice it then says that 2 connections have been created, and I can click on the icon over here to actually highlight them. So you can see the 2 previous extrusions here that were not connected are now connected. So with this, I can then try to generate my panel again by then holding Control, selecting all of the extrusions over here, right-clicking, and select Create Panel. So the panel materials have actually been covered in a previous webinar, but if you do want to check them out, there is a panel section in our parts library on the Vention website. In this case, I'll select the countersink hole and the PolyEgo HDPE panel, which is commonly used for workstation surfaces. One of the great things about the panels is that it actually automatically generates cutouts, both around our plates, gussets, and extrusions that are in the panel path. So say I zoom in over here, you'll notice that it does create the extrusion or the cutout around the extrusions for that. Say I created a panel on the right side over here, say selecting these 4 and generating a panel. It would also create cutouts directly around these assembly plates, depending on what they are. Say on the front, I have the L plate, it would create an L cutout, but on these triangle plates, it would create triangle cutouts. For that, I do invite you guys to explore the options available if you do want to try out the MachineBuilder for yourself. So from here, the next thing that I like to do is actually build the shelves themselves that the parts would be placed on for my machine tending cart. So in this case, I want to bring in a new extrusion to start building the shelf. There are a few different ways to do this. The first, kind of most standard way that new users would be accustomed to, is going to the structural and framing parts library on the left over here, clicking structural and framing, and selecting the extrusion from the list available. In this case, we will be designing using the 45 by 45 millimeter increment, and then selecting the correct length I need. So there's a few step process. So for example, you'd have to then measure the internal dimension, figure out which one you need, go to the drop-down menu, select the precise one that you need, bring it in, and attach it. Again, it's still a little bit faster than standard design softwares, but it can be even faster. And this is where I'll highlight the shortcut, which is the letter I, or the insert key on your keyboard, that allows you to reinsert the last click part or the last inserted part in your design. So with this, I know I'll be using a 45 by 45 millimeter extrusion. So I can simply select one in my design and press I to snap it to the edge of my cursor. With that, I can then drag it to the location I'm looking to snap it to, and then left click to confirm. You'll notice that there is a little bit of interference on the left side over here, but with the Vention extrusions, you can actually resize them on the fly directly in the MachineBuilder. Say I messed up over here and actually made it a little bit too short. It's really not the end of the world. I can simply click on it, use the L shortcut, and then resize it to the size that I need. Now that I'm done with this, I actually want to make sure that it's attached to my structure. So what I'll be missing is either some plating or some gussets. This is where I bring in the next smart design tool, which is the suggested parts. So you'll notice as I've been designing, once I've been clicking on a part, we do have this window that pops up on the right over here. This is a movable window that you can bring anywhere you'd like on your screen to help with your designing, depending on your design style. But what it does is that it highlights the next best suggested part based on what you've highlighted in your design. Say I click on a plate, it will change the next suggested part based on the most commonly used parts with that one. In my case, if I select the extrusion, most commonly used one is a gusset, which is in fact what I'm looking for. Again, if I don't know how to use the part suggestion and know what part I'm looking for, I can scan through the parts library, but this does make your designing process a little bit faster, which is the point of today's webinar, to showcase how easy it is to design some complex machines or industrial structures such as this. So with this, I've added the left bracing over here, and I'll go with the drawer slides that will actually be holding my drawers in place. So I'll go to the frame accessories, scroll down, and find the telescopic slides. Notice there are a few different options, both the standards as well as the precision telescopic slides. But for machine tending applications, I highly recommend going with the precision telescopic slides, since they are designed for this application. So even at full extension, they are designed to be as rigid as possible with as little deflection during their operation. So with that, again, I can then start building out the rest of my drawer. So again, using the shortcut keys, I will be speeding through the design process a little bit here, since it are all actions and sequences that I've seen before, that I've shown to you guys before in the past. So using the I to reinsert, going around over here, attaching another extrusion to act as the center point of, or the other arm of my drawer. Notice here, again, I do have some interference between the extrusions that I've already added to my design, but again, using the resize shortcut, bring it down to the correct size. And finally, one of the great features of MachineBuilder is they're really not set in stone with any part that you would add to your design. Say this extrusion over here, I really wanted it all the way at the end. I don't have to say delete the part and reinsert it. I can simply click on it to get the available degrees of freedom and then slide it along the extrusion to the end point. And finally, add the drawer slide and the final bracing member. Again, using the reinsert part really makes designing that much quicker. Adding the 2 extra gussets underneath over here. And then we've almost completed the drawer. The only thing we need is the top panel, as well as actually some extra connectors to actually make sure it gets held together. So again, using the insert feature, I'll bring in one of the gussets and bring it to the corner over here, which brings us to the next smart design tool, the ability to auto-complete structures such as this. So if on the right, you'll notice that, let me zoom out a little bit over here. On the right, you'll notice as I bring the gusset into the corner, you'll see the shadow of one in the other corners. So what this does, it gives you the option to actually automatically add to all 4 corners. Again, I do have the option to add one at a time, but if you really want to speed up your design process, these small features do make it a lot easier to do. This is done by holding Control and then pressing the confirm arrow or the check mark to confirm the selection. So that automatically adds the 4 gussets in the corners. Finally, we'll create a panel on top by right-clicking, create panel. Again, selecting the countersink hole since it does give a flush finish, which is better for machine tending applications. And then letting that go there. Finally, I'll add just a few extra details, such as the handle on one side for an operator to pull out, as well as a handle for a robot to pull out as well. So again, keeping in the frame accessories, I'll select the handle over here, attach it to my structure. And again, one of the great things about MachineBuilder is you can just drop it into the general location and slide it into the location that you need afterwards. Moving on to the other side, I'll go back to the structural and framing, go down to our round extrusion profile and attach the specific hardware that we use normally for machine tending applications. Again, being able to resize like this, attaching the secondary part, and then sliding it over to the center position. So that we've essentially created one fully functional drawer meant to be used for machine tending applications. For the rest of this, again, I am missing the other two drawers. Now, normally you can go through the process of redesigning each individual drawer by itself, or you can use one of the great features is the ability to copy paste multiple parts or sub-assemblies within your design. All you have to do is essentially select the part you'd like to use. In this case, using the left drag and drop window, you'll notice that I selected only parts that were inside the window, pressing Control C to then copy. I'll actually move this up to the top for later use. And on the right side here, pressing Control V to paste the two shelves into my design. From here, I can use two different methods to attach it. The first essentially being drag and drop. So selecting the attachment point that I would like and where I'd like to attach it, letting go and then pressing Enter or the green arrow key to confirm to the location. And then the other option is using the point-to-point connection tool. Again, this is something highlighted in the previous webinar, but does make designing, fine-tune designing a little bit easier. This is for when you want to attach specific areas of a sub-assembly to a greater assembly, which is the case that I have over here. So I have my sub-assembly of my drawer, and I'd like to attach it to my cart. So I can go up to the point-to-point connection tool and click on that, or use the shortcut P as well. So I can click P on my keyboard, select the point I would then like to connect, and then select a secondary point that I would like to connect that to. So in this case, to the assembly over here. Again, confirming using the Enter key or the green check mark. The final step that I'd like to do is properly space out the entire drawers. So you'll notice over here, we do have equal spacing, but when I drag them in, the spacing is a little bit off. So this brings us to the next great tool, which is the ability to smart dimension sub-assemblies or smaller parts within your design. First thing that you need to do is actually attach a measurement between the two objects that you'd like to dimension or space out. In this case, I use the measurement tool, the letter M, or the face-to-face measurement tool. Then you click on the measurement itself and cycle through using the arrow keys. Any part that is highlighted will be the part that is then moved when using the Smart Dimension tool. In this case, I can use either the plus or minus arrow keys buttons over here, which will then jump my design in the snapping increment that I've chosen, or I can use a value that I can input by simply typing in my keyboard. In my case, I'm looking to have this space out at 180. And then I could do the same thing for the bottom one. Say for the bottom one, I like to have it a slightly larger spacing. Say for example, I'm using a larger design. Again, in this case, if I click on the left, it will then move the top one. Or if I click on the right, it should be able to select the bottom drawer. So let's do 190 millimeters and press Enter to confirm. With that, I spaced out my drawers appropriately and I've essentially completed my cart over here. So this does complete the second portion of the webinar, showcasing how easy it is to use some smart design tools. And before I actually showcase, there will be two more parts that I'd like to showcase over here before I move on to the range extender itself. So the first thing I'd like to showcase, which is a great feature when designing by yourself, is the ability to have an automated system scan through your design to see if there are any errors. So in the top right over here, you notice there's a button that says Automated Design Check. What this does, if I click it, it scans through my design to double check that I'm not missing any gusseting, plating, or if I do have any automation equipment, if I'm missing any additional hardware. So if I do click this, it will scan through my design and find any errors that I might have missed. So you'll notice over here that I do have one error. So it's saying that I'm missing a plate or a connector. So if I click on this and then click on the actual error itself, it will highlight the parts in question that are missing that connector. If I scroll down, you'll notice some of the other options or errors that it does scan for, which are, say, missing sensors, interference, floating parts, or even if you're missing an e-stop module for an piece of automated equipment. In my case, it really am just missing a small connector. So if I zoom in, you'll notice I have a gusset in the corner over here, but I'm missing one in the corner over here. It then proposes the most likely hardware that will be able to rectify the situation. So in this case, a gusset, a plate, or an edge connector. So I'll select the gusset that I've been using for the other ones, confirm its selection. And once I have done that, you'll notice the issue does resolve itself from the menu. So with that, I can close it off, recenter my design using RNF, and double check that I do have everything. So from here, it does look like I have completed my cart assembly, and I can actually move on to the rest of the webinar. So from here, I'll be moving on to the automated design portion, creating both a range extender and a basic floor plan layout. If there are any questions before I move on, I'd say now is a great time to ask them. But for the moment, I'll actually load up the secondary design. And one of the great things about MachineBuilder is everything that I'm doing right here is all cloud-based. So there's no software that you need to download on your computer. all you have to do is log into your Vention account that you've created, and you get designing as simple as that. So anything that I also do, all these designs, most of them are actually readily available on our Vention website as public designs that you can gain access to and edit yourself if you'd like to then start from a base structure. Or again, if you'd like, you can start from brand new design to create something from the ground up. So this, I'll leave this design over here and bring in the range extender that we will be designing towards for the rest of the webinar. So again, similar to what I did before, I do already have a range extender over here, but I'll showcase some of the basic steps that you need to do to actually start off with your own automated system. So what I'll do, again, using another shortcut, I'll go over here and press Control-H to actually hide this from my design. What this does, it actually simply hides it from view, but doesn't actually delete it from my design. Again, if I want to bring it back, I press Control-Shift-H to undo that action. But since I do want it out of the way, I'll leave it hidden for the moment. So the first thing I'd like to do is actually bring in my automation components. So if you go on the parts library on the left, we do have a few different types of automation components, such as robots, linear motion, rotary motion, pneumatics, as well as some controls and motors. Again, we do have 1,000+ parts on our platform, so I would recommend you guys taking a chance to look at them to see what you can use to fit your needs. In my case, I will be using designing towards a range extender to house a UR10 robot, so a slightly larger cobot. So I'll be sticking with our heavy-duty enclosed timing belt. So I'll select the 1530mm one and drop it into my design space. And this is where the next smart design tool pops up that I will be highlighting, which is the configuration assistant. So what the configuration assistant does, essentially when you drop in any specific part of automation equipment, say a linear actuator, a specific rack and pinion housing, or even the rack itself, the configuration assistant goes through the parts that are required to create a fully functional automated system. Say for this range extender that I plan on having, to be able to make it run, I need a motor, the sensors, as well as the controller and ESOP. So this is one of the simpler actuators, but for the more complex ones, say our rack and pinion system or the belt rack actuators that do require a bit of additional hardware, it does really help you in terms of walking you through the process that you need. So in my case, since I am running with a larger robot, I'll stick with a larger motor, automatically add the 2 sensors over here. And then for this, since I do already have a machine motion controller as well as an e-stop in my design on the other range extender, I can leave them out and simply close the configuration with the X. If you'd like to bring it back, the configuration assistant back up, you do have to then reinsert a new actuator into your design, but it's really easy to do. So the next steps of creating a automation equipment is creating the base frame. So with Vention's MachineBuilder, actually adding the automation equipment is really quite easy with the configuration assistant and take some of the more complex portions out of it. Really, the most important thing to do afterwards is making sure that you do have a rigid base frame so your structure is as strong as possible when in motion. So this having a rigid base frame allows it to be as accurate and repeatable as possible. So when designing a substructure for a piece of automation equipment, I do highly recommend designing with some of our larger profiles, either the 45x90 or the 90x90mm extrusion profile, which is what I'll be using for the next portion of this. So again, I'll be speeding through a little bit of the design since it is stuff that I have covered, but it really goes to show how fast and easy it is to design using MachineBuilder. Again, all this is done on the cloud. All you do need is an internet connection to do it. So again, using the part suggestion tool to get the plate that I'm looking for, I to reinsert it. And then again, since I do know I'll be using some of the 90x90mm extrusion to create the legs, again, simply using the I to reinsert it over and over and over again. The ability to resize on the fly like that does make designing with MachineBuilder very easy and quick to do. So what I'll be doing here is just finishing up one of the legs for one side and then going to the finished range extender to highlight some of the key features that should be kept in mind when designing one. So in this case, go back to my parts library, frame accessories, some end caps over here just for safety, and of course the leveling feet themselves. So again, you'll see on the parts library, we do have an extensive parts library in terms of leveling feet, floor anchors, some lighting, as well as some hinges and stuff, depending on what your application requires. So in this case, say I'm creating legs and do have multiple of them along the range extender itself, I can use the copy paste feature. So selecting parts that I need, pressing Control-C and Control-V to bring it into space. And that does make designing that much quicker and easier to do if you do have parts that repeat themselves over and over. So this, I will stop the range extender portion over here and bring in the other one just to make sure I have time to cover the floor plan layout. So this, just some things to keep in mind when designing some automation equipment is to make sure that you properly brace your system. So you'll notice I do have quite a few of the 90x90mm gussets over here. here with some heavy plating both for the legs as well as the side. This is, again, to ensure that my system is as accurate and repeatable as process while in motion. On one side, I do have the machine motion control and the e-stop for safety. And then on the other side, some cable management system for systems that do have the cabling that travels with the gantry plate, which in my case is true since I will be adding a UR10 robot to the system. Again, we do have multiple robots on our platform that do function with the rest of our hardware. These include the Doosan H-Series, Fanuc CRX, as well as multiple URs. So with this essentially terminates the design of the range extender and will lead me into the last portion of creating a floor plan layout. So there are a few different ways that you can actually import designs from import parts from one design into another. The first way is you can actually copy paste features from one design into another as long as the tabs are open. In my case, I have closed tabs, so I'll be using the secondary version, which is the ability to insert full components or insert full designs from one into another. So in my case, you go to the insert components and can select from either your recently designs, your team designs, collaborations, or even some of the public designs that we do have on our library. In my case, I know I'll be using this cart, so I select the cart from the drop-down menu, and then can actually drop it into my design. It's easy as that to actually bring two designs together. There's no real reason to open them up in themselves, save them, double check to make sure they fit, because once you do bring them in, you can actually edit them again afterwards. So say I bring my machine tending cart close to my robot over here, which will normally be the case when you are designing a machine tending application. And the final thing that I like to then say check to see if my layout works is to see if my robot has enough reach. So with that, I'll go into my public models over here, to my environmental models, scroll down and add 2 CNCs to my design. So this allows me then to validate both the length of my range extender as well as the reach of my robot. In my case, I'll go for a top view, bring the CNCs to their most likely orientation, again, side by side. Let's make them a little bit more visible for you guys. And then I can double check or verify the reach of my robot directly within CAD, which is one of the great things for MachineBuilder. Say I left click on my range extender itself, I could then drag the gantry plate over to one side, right click on the robot, and actually edit the robot and be able to drag it around and manipulate within the CAD. So in this case, I could validate that it's able to reach inside the CNC on the left, bring it back out. Again, then click on my range extender, bring the robot over to the other side, and then validate to see if it's able to reach inside this one. Again, right clicking, selecting edit robot, and then validating that it can reach inside. So with that, it allows you to create some very powerful floor plan layouts. Say you're using multiple, say, workstations, range extenders, carts. Really, the options are limitless, and you can check out the multiple designs that we do have on our platform in the design section on our Vention website. But it showcases what you can do all within a single web browser.